session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart,
Here.
Councilmember Kovar,
Here.
Councilmember Dvala,
Present.
Councilmember Kostick,
Here.
Councilmember Siemens,
Present.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Great, thank you, everyone. Looking ahead at our agenda items on Monday, May 17th, the council will meet in administrative function session to continue doing city manager interviews. Then we meet again on Wednesday, May 19th for our regular meeting here at 7:30. That evening, for the record, we have a proclamation thanking the District 20 delegation for its efforts in the 2021 legislative session. And we have a proclamation for Foster Care Awareness Month. We'll have a presentation that evening from our youth council and a wrap up from our legislative advocate on the 2021 legislative session in Annapolis. Our voting session next week will be the second reading ordinance of the FY 2022 tax rate, our stormwater management budget, and our FY 2022 budget. We will also have a resolution approving request to close Laurel Avenue for the Washington Opera truck performance on May 28th. Our work sessions next week will be a work session from our urban forest manager. He will provide a report on the multi-year plan, pilot project, and tree fund. We will have a discussion of procurement and purchase of police field radios. And then next week, we tentatively will be continuing our discussion of committees. On Wednesday, May 26th, tentatively, the council will not be meeting that week, but stay tuned. And then on Wednesday, June 2nd, we have that evening, for the record, a proclamation for National Gun Violence Awareness Day, which is on June 4th. Tentatively, we have a presentation from the Grants Review Committee. Our voting session will include single reading ordinance approving purchase of police field radios. Our discussion that evening will be of the Garland Avenue subdivision, and tentatively we have work sessions on the reauthorization of the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Development Authority and our continued discussion of committees. All right. This evening, for the record, we have a proclamation recognizing Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and I will read that now. Whereas May was established as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month by Congress in 1992, and whereas Asian Pacific American Heritage Month is a celebration of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in the United States, and whereas the month of May was chosen to commemorate the immigration of the first Japanese people to the United States on May 7th, 1843, and to mark the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, because the majority of workers who laid the tracks were Chinese immigrants. And whereas despite generations of living and contributing to the fabric of American society, many Asian, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders continue to be treated as not belonging and face persistent racism and stereotyping. And whereas since 9/11, South Asian Americans, especially those who are Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh, often face senseless violence and harassment due to the color of their skin or the tenets of their faith. And more recently, since COVID-19 pandemic, Asians in general, particularly women and the elderly, have faced anti-Asian violence. And whereas May is the month to reflect on the rich diversity of the Asian Pacific community and the contributions Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders have made to our culture and civic life. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, hereby proclaim May as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in Tacoma Park. Thank you. All right, that is it for our proclamations this evening. Next, we will have public comments, and we will begin on public comments on voting items. Our voting item tonight is our FY 2022 tax rate, stormwater management budget, and our overall FY 2022 budget. And I think is Ms. Mary Jane Machuity with us? There she is. Ms. Machuity, you're up first. Ms. Machuity, I think you're still on mute. There you go.
Thank
We can
you.
hear you.
I just wanted to say that it's Mental Health Awareness Month this month, and that's really important. You can be at different races and sexual proclivities or whatever nationalities and still have mental health problems. So this is just something that affects everybody. And I can tell it's in my family, you know, that it really affects me. And as a founder of Parents of Special Needs Adults, I see that lots of times people with mental illness are treated like second class or worse citizens. They're always told it's their fault. Where if you have a so-called physical illness, it's you're treated a lot better, and people have empathy towards you. But I'm digressing. I guess I'm supposed to be talking to property taxes, and I think us low income homeowners in Tacoma Park would please have a break. And I'm sorry that a lot of things are being spent on taxes in Tacoma Park, like $10 million from the library that could have been spent $2 million, I think, and other things, especially the street narrowing, which makes me a lot difficult for me to drive. I don't drive that much, but the street narrowing really scares me. And the cement on the sidewalks doesn't meet, and two times I've had major breaks because of that, tripping on the sidewalks. And I make it asking for money back from taxes, make it a lot easier. It's really difficult. And I have a friend who makes less money than me, and she said she had to turn in her copy of her driver's license to prove her age. And I think that's awful. This is a woman who's low income, Black lady, and why should she have to? That sounds like Jim Crow to me. But anyways, I just want to say that I'd like to be us low income homeowners to take this in consideration. Maybe you should prorate our part of the taxes, and please make Tacoma. I'm doing a lot of things, but Tacoma Park, why can't the recreation department, the library, be under Montgomery County, so we don't have to go through all this paperwork to get the money back? At least those two, the library and the recreation department, I think they should be under Montgomery County. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Machuey. All right, Ms. Black, you're up next. And I just want to ask the city clerk, is our clock not working tonight? Should I keep?
It is working. It was city clerk failure, not clock failure. So
All right,
next time, yeah.
great. All right, we're all set.
Thanks, Nadine Block, Ward 3. I'm making comment tonight on the overall budget. Really just wanted to address my opposition and dismay at our inability to reduce and the public budget for the police department and the insistence on keeping the K-9 unit in play. I really want to encourage you to think what would actually transform public safety and our community well-being here. I would recommend that you don't pass this budget with increased funds for the police and continued money for the K-9 unit. I'd say retire that old dog. It is nationally the time to reduce police budgets. I think if we want to continue in any way to be considered a progressive outpost, we should actually look at some of this and I know you have looked at some of it carefully, but perhaps not carefully enough as to how to support social work and other community-based support, and remove it from police oversight and invest in truly transforming the community through transform public safety initiatives. That's all I have to say about the budget tonight. Other people have addressed other things. Thanks very much.
Great. Actually, Ms. Black, you can stay because I think you're first up for general public comments too, and you're last for comments on voting items. So you get to go again.
Awesome. I think I was last for the public comments on the budget, but I'm happy to go now. So in honor of Hold the City Elected Officials Accountable for Staff Actions Week, which is this week in case you don't know, I'm really wondering, and I would really like to have the city mayor and the city council make some kind of statement on what I'd say is the now infamous and retracted false statements about the safety of business deliveries at the junction. And I would really like to know more about the role of staff in that statement, and why has no staff been held accountable? Why is the mismanager still involved in the NDC negotiations or the project at all? Really wondering that. And whether or not this holiday of holding our electeds accountable for their staff actions is widely observed or not, I think it's really important because, especially given the false statements that have now been retracted by Ms. Manager and what I would consider disastrous potential outcomes for our local grocery store, the co-op, if they can't use the loading area off the street, as well as the implications for the city, you all, the mayor, the city council members, who now have to deal with a lawsuit and all the associated time and money associated with a lawsuit. When in fact, it seems to me that there's a clear, pretty easy solution. And it's in your purview to execute this solution, to drop NDC, hold them accountable for violating the agreement with you, and to remove the manager from the project and any further negotiations or work on this project, because it seems that the elected official involved doesn't have a neutral position on what's happening and is not standing up adequately for the community. I would like you all to please consider this resolution. And I would like the staff to be increasingly transparent about the role the city lawyer, the city mayor, the city council members, as well as other staff have had in this work and in this retracted statement. So please drop NDC and hold staff accountable and do your job, which you do have power to do, to hold this bully developer accountable and not continue inappropriate actions that are only going to become worse as time goes on if you don't exercise your authority and your ability to exercise that power. Thanks very much, and I look forward to something else developing at the junction with a responsible developer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Thomas is next, correct?
Good evening, neighbors, especially those of my neighbors who are fortunate and honored to be elected officials who represent all of us. I want to begin by thanking my neighbor, Peter Kovar, also council member Kovar, but first neighbor, for communicating with me. Last week, I asked 3 questions. I listened to the rest of the council meeting. I did not hear anybody comment on what any of the citizens said about the Tacoma Junction. I have had no response except my communication with Peter. I've had no communication from any of you regarding the questions I asked. If nothing else, when somebody asks a question and you don't answer, it's rude. Now, you can answer, I'm sorry, I can't give you a specific answer because fill in the blank. So let me paraphrase and restate the most salient question. I am not a member of Tacoma Vision, but I have seen the critique that they have made of the Junction project and what they allege to be shortcomings or failures of the developer. I asked last week, I'm asking again this week, and I'm asking any of you, each of you, to respond to me and to the community at large. Is their criticism valid? If any of their criticisms are valid, what is the city's response? It's a matter of courtesy. It's a matter of good politics. It's a matter of good policy. Please answer. Thank you.
Great. Next, we have Jessica Landman.
Good evening. Jessica Landman, Park Avenue, Ward 1. Today, I'm here to speak about something that I hope is very dear to all of your hearts, namely the reclaiming of your role as the decision makers for the city. In March of 2020, which is over 14 months ago, this city council enacted an uncodified emergency ordinance number 2020-4, giving emergency powers to the city manager. At the time, you were uncertain whether the council could continue to function, to meet and carry out oversight and legislative duties because of the pandemic. You had concerns about continuity of government, not wanting to cause any delays in enacting any authorities needed to carry out emergency city functions. Very shortly thereafter, the city manager used her emergency powers to justify not responding in a timely way to a PIA request. After a public outcry and the intervention of an ombudsperson, this decision was rescinded, but it left a bitter aftertaste. It's been apparent for the last year or more that you can meet, act, and legislate under the new normal. We do not need emergency power in this city. I doubt that you feel an emergency justifying extra powers to the city manager continues today, if it ever existed. The ordinance specifies that the mayor and council may rescind it by a simple majority vote. It's clearly past time for such a vote. For example, are you getting a written report every 2 days on any exercises of emergency powers and the rationale for them as is required by that ordinance? If not, then either the ordinance is being ignored or more likely there's been no need for emergency powers lately. But either way, this ordinance, setting aside our small town's rule of law, has outlived whatever usefulness it may once have had. The ordinance expires automatically when the governor lifts his emergency declaration, but a legislative link between emergency powers of our city and Governor Hogan actually makes little sense. His emergency powers for a public health emergency go for things like allowing him to deploy state funds and staff for COVID testing or purchasing of PPE, etc. That is irrelevant to Tacoma Park's needs. In other words, we should not wait for the state of Maryland's emergency to end to bring our own emergency powers authorization to an end. Now, according to your procedures on public testimony, and on this, I want to point out that this is relevant to the last speaker as well. Your procedures say, when a speaker asks a question during public comments, to the extent possible, responses are provided later in the meeting during council comments or city manager comments. So please do respond to my question tonight. When will the emergency powers ordinance be rescinded? Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was on mute. Do we have Linda next? The city clerk.
I'm sorry, I believe Linda Rabin is next and
Mhm.
she should be on the meeting. I believe.
I'm not seeing her.
Yeah.
Do you see her, Cindy? Is that what you're pointing to? I don't.
Yeah, she is. I brought her in as a panelist.
I
So
see her name.
Ms. Rabin, you can unmute yourself and start to speak or turn on your camera if you wish. Perhaps we could move on to Stephen Kern, who I can bring in.
Great.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Stephen.
Wonderful. Good evening, Stephen Kern, Ward 2. Tonight I will address parking at the junction. Some of you may tune out when you hear that, thinking the subject was adequately addressed in the 2016 lease agreement and the 2018 resolution. But I feel obliged to point out that the agreement between NDC and the city is unlikely to provide a single new parking space. There are currently about 50 parking spaces in the lot. The above ground spaces will be removed and replaced with about 50 below grade spaces, a net gain of 0. One can argue the exact number and look at NDC's pending request for a waiver from the county, but the more relevant issue is the legal reality that NDC can reserve all of its parking for its incoming tenants, meaning we could be looking at a net loss of 50 spaces in the junction as a whole. 50 vital parking spaces that our current junction businesses describe as their lifeline. Wait just a darn minute, you say. The 2016 lease agreement states that, quote, the project will be designed to provide parking options for area businesses not located within the project, close quote. And look at our 2018 resolution that says there must be, quote, inclusion of public parking for area businesses. And you know what? That's pretty much what the president of NDC, Adrian Washington, told us in a recent Zoom meeting. Mr. Washington looked directly into the camera and told us the project spaces will be, quote, open to everyone. There is not an assigned, this is for you, this is for someone else, close quote. And when I asked Washington for a guarantee, he said, quote, the guarantee is in the agreement. But that's not true, is it? You wrote the 2016 agreement and the 2018 resolution, and I just read you the sections on parking. In fact, under the current agreement, NDC has the absolute right to reserve all but one space in the development, the single parking space dedicated to co-op loading. If you allow NDC to move forward, and as all of you know by now, I hope you don't, I urge you to address this gaping legal loophole once and for all by adding an amendment to the 2016 lease agreement stating that NDC must leave at least 75% of vehicle parking spaces in the project open to the general public, that those spaces cannot and will not be leased solely to its tenants. Make Mr. Washington an honest man,
Thank you, Mr. Kern.
shining his own words that the
Thank you, Mr. Kern. That your time is up. Thank you very much for coming this evening.
everyone. Thank you.
Do we have, were we able to get Linda on, or is she?
I don't know. Let's try one more time. Ms. Rabin, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, if not, I have Kathy Breckville,
Great.
and she should be able to talk now. Ms. Breckville?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm having some problems with Zoom and could not get on tonight. The first thing I want to do is thank the mayor, the council, and the staff for working on the Government Operations Committee recommendations that the county municipalities receive rebates that are appropriate for our services that are duplicated. Hopefully this will come to fruition. And I see that as a fiduciary responsibility. And I say that, I use the term fiduciary as someone who has worked with it for over 25 years. About 25, 27 years ago, I was on a citizens ethics committee for the city to review our ethics approaches and training. I don't know if there is any training currently going on, but there really ought to be, because every public employee and elected official is in fact a legal fiduciary and has legal responsibilities to act in the interest only of the citizens. Okay, and that's what you've done working on the rebates. However, I don't feel that that has been totally done in regard to our contract with NDC. One of the requirements of being a fiduciary is loyalty, and that loyalty requires all of you, everyone in your rooms, to put your own personal desires aside for the better achievement of what is good for the total community. In this case, I personally believe that NDC has not, in fact, lived up to its agreements. By violating its agreements, by looking for waivers from the county, by ignoring the State Highway Association and trying to work around that, they're not looking out for the best interests of the community. I'm particularly concerned about the safety issues at the junction. I'm also concerned about their lack of trustworthiness in terms of what they actually intend to build, because since they keep changing their drawings, no one really knows. And I'm very worried about the stormwater issues, because as you probably know by now, our stormwater requirements do not meet current rain expectations due to global warming. So I would like the city to revisit their fiduciary responsibilities, and one of them's already been mentioned. They have a
Thank you,
duty
Ms.
to be
Burkell. Your time is up.
accountable to the public
Thank,
for their behavior.
great. Thank you so much for your comments this evening. Should we, I'm asking the city clerk, should we try Ms. Raven again or go to Mr. Navari?
But let's go to Mr. Navari, and
Okay.
if Ms. Rabin is having problems, she could email me.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so my comments today relate to legitimacy, and I'm concerned about the legitimacy and the credibility of the council as an oversight body. When I look at and we hear about the actions of the city manager, Susie Ludlow, recently making false statements about safety. And these false statements were so egregious that city attorney had to get involved. They've been retracted, and now we have a costly lawsuit. I think, I don't know, I hope you guys remember all the work I did last year on the stormwater fees. And I told you that there were some miscalculations made in the city manager's comments. And unfortunately, instead of just saying, yep, we made a mistake, she denied that. And to me, that was another egregious example of something that borders on unethical. Andrew Strongen also talked to SHA and disproved some of the statements she made, claiming statements they had made. So there's a long record of her performance being less than exemplary, and you're the oversight body, and the citizens are asking, like, what is going on over there? Why is she still in this position? Why is she in a position of negotiating with NDC? Why is she leading and in charge of the city staff when there's this record that is now costing us money? Forgetting about her performance issues with, $250,000 dog park bond that was missed. So it's just beyond us. And I really think that there's a lot of people talking about the council losing legitimacy and credibility because of the failure to lead. Same thing with NDC. I mean, it was so basic. The one quantitative agreement in the agreement was to give public space, and they did not give the 2,700 square feet of public space. So that is a direct violation, and you've not held them accountable. Adrienne Washington is on the record, as Steve Kern just said, lying about what's in the agreement and are being protected about parking. So these are further examples of how you're failing in your oversight duties, and it's calling into question the legitimacy and the credibility of the body. And we're just baffled. We're baffled out here that you're hiding and pretending to be helpless spectators. I grew up in Burlington, Vermont. The city council and the mayor drove an amazing development down on the waterfront, and I'm just not seeing the leadership, and it's such a disappointment. It's such a lost opportunity. It's baffling. Don't understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Navari. Linda, you're up next. Don't think we can hear you. I'm muted on phone. All right. Let's see. Jesse, do you think we could figure out? I see two phone numbers. You want to try unmuting one or? All right, Linda, try now.
Yeah, try now. I'm allowing both to talk. Let's hope for the best.
Yep.
Hello, can you hear
Yes,
me?
we did it. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've been a resident of Tacoma Park for more than 30 years and a homeowner in the city for 27 years. Since public resistance to the Tacoma Junction project became vocal and sustained about 3 years ago, I've been thinking more and more that the quirky, diverse town I've called home for 3 decades is no more. Gentrification, unaffordable taxes, and unresponsive government have killed it for me. The city managers and city council's arrogant refusal to listen to or even acknowledge public concerns about the project has been especially disheartening. I no longer trust or believe anything you say. The mayors, city managers, and city council's abject failure to take responsibility for the city's role in inciting NDC's outrageous misbehavior was the last straw. As a result, I'm moving away in a couple of months. Still hoping that the public will prevails in spite of everything, I bid you all a sad farewell.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments this evening. Asking the city clerk, do we have anyone else who for public comments tonight?
No, that I believe we've heard from everyone who had, well, everyone that I can locate who has.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So then we'll go to council comments. Any council comments this evening? See, Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. I know that there have been some questions over the last few weeks regarding the Tacoma Junction Development Project. It may not be clear to everyone that there has been a lawsuit initiated regarding that project. And I believe from everything I know that most lawyers would advise clients that are part of a lawsuit not to comment on said lawsuit while it is still active and will be appearing before court. And so I want people to understand that as frustrating as that might be for them, it for me is equally frustrating. And I can certainly appreciate your frustrations, but I can also promise you I'm going to do what I think is in the best interest of the taxpayers of Tacoma Park and the residents of Tacoma Park, regardless of what your position may be on the development. On another subject, I would like to say that, or let you know that there is an upcoming television show that will feature a piece on home buying in Tacoma Park. Miguel Monteverde, the Senior Vice President and General Manager of WETA, said, "We're proud to present episodes that provide a fresh perspective about the current real estate market for new and longtime Washingtonian residents alike." It's going to be a 30-minute episode that will show tours of 3 properties in Tacoma Park with a local realtor. There will be a starter home, a mid-level home, and a dream house. The show will air on Sunday, May 24th at 9 p.m. on WETA. This is an unpaid public service announcement. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith.
First, I'd like to thank the residents for coming out tonight and giving comments on the junction. I do appreciate it. I wish that the city could respond, but because of the lawsuit that my colleague, Councilmember Siemens mentioned, it has made it very difficult for us to give any opinion, but I do appreciate those speaking. I have a couple other comments that I'd like to give, primarily about the budget. Last week, when we talked about budget priorities and if we should fund them, I was not aware that the library had asked for 80,000 in funding to expand their services. In the budget reconciliation list, there was only 50,000. Staff requested funding to pay for Wi-Fi hotspots, Chromebooks, and digital lockers. Now, I have not seen their exact requirements, but I suspect that none of us on the council have. I don't know the disconnect, but I wanted to make sure that the library gets all the funding it needs, especially once construction happens, and expand services to residents throughout the city. The library is important to me, and I don't want to see it shortchanged in any way. I hope you will join me in my pledge to make sure that the library does not miss out on funding again for actual services. While we are talking about money, we have, as Charles Dickens would say, Great Expectations, book I had to read during the summer when I was in prep school. We will soon have $7 million this year, and I want us to start having those discussions now so we can be thoughtful about how we make those investments in our residents. Some of the ideas that I have been thinking about is ways to connect people. We have been so isolated during the pandemic, and people want to, once again, spend time with one another. I would like to see places and spaces where we can come together, where we can connect to each other, look each other in the eye, and really see our neighbors. I would like to see more recreation spaces. I'd like to, especially in Ward 5, I would like to bring some basketball courts to my ward and soccer spaces other than just what Washington Adventist University has on their campus. I would like to see if we can add a series of outdoor movies. I've talked about movies or Shakespeare in the Park before. I hope that's something that we can accomplish once we eventually make it out of the pandemic, or music in the ward on a regular basis. I want to help the library bring books to the community by making it so easy that everyone makes getting books a part of their routine, especially those people that live in the apartment buildings in Ward 5. I want to see every house, regardless of income, with access to the internet. With the ARPA funds, this hopefully will be a possibility. And I want to see more public spaces like the Wi-Fi library regarding a garden in a streetery in my ward where we can come together. That's very important. I'd like to see more public art and more music events. Ward 5 is starting with public arts. I think we probably have the least amount, or one of the least amount of public art projects in the city. We can do this. Let's work together to start the conversation here and then in the larger community. A transparent, community engaged process is the best way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Searcy.
Great. Good evening, everyone. So I want to follow my colleague's lead in reiterating that due to the ongoing lawsuit that does limit our ability to speak regarding matters at the junction. Again, I just want to reiterate, as Councilmember Smith as well as Councilmember Siemens has said, we are definitely working to ensure that taxpayer dollars on this particular project are being used appropriately, and in no way are we trying to not be transparent in terms of what is happening. So just want to make sure that folks understand that. And I know there was another question about emergency powers, and I know that was a question that I've raised. And so we'll ask the mayor and some of my colleagues if folks agree that we're in a good place, that we can move forward on relieving the city manager. I don't know how much relief you would get, but relieving the city manager of that emergency, those emergency powers. Because I agree with statements that were made during the public comments. We've been at this now for over a year, so we're kind of getting good at it. And so I think we can move forward in that regard. So announcements. Want to remind folks to come out on Wednesdays to the farmers market. Today, I had a chance to run into our urban forest manager, who I had never seen in person, who we met while waiting in line for tacos. So want to encourage folks to head out to the farmers market on Wednesdays, grab a quick lunch, and happen to run into a neighbor or city staff that are also out there grabbing lunch on Wednesdays. And the food is good, and I still got more churros from Brazilian Bakery. Reminder, Hillwood Manor Playground Survey is out. Please, 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 please vote for a design, which design you like. There are some super cool designs. I was so excited to see them. Nets and walls to climb and all kinds of things. So they're really interesting designs. Definitely want to encourage folks to go online to vote for your favorite. And please be sure to include the kids in your decision-making. Also had an opportunity to chat with Gary Witherspoon from the Purple Line today, just as he's reaching out to remind everyone that our University Boulevard Community Advisory Team meeting, or CAT meeting, is on May the 19th at 6:30. So CAT team members are definitely encouraged to participate, as well as submit any questions that you have for the presentation ahead of time. So just want to encourage my colleagues as well, if you have any Purple Line related questions and you're not on the CAT, if you want to send them to me as they relate to University Boulevard, that would be great. And I can make sure to send all of our questions forward. The presentations are recorded, so they are trying to get the questions that we have ahead of time so that they can prepare the answers, and then they're ultimately recorded. So just want to encourage folks to do that. And that is all I have. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Councilman Costick.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First, just want to thank all of the public commenters. And as other council members have said, it is very difficult for us to be limited in what we can say, but it is always very helpful for us to hear from you. And I always really value hearing people's opinions on this and other things. So thank you for coming out. I also want to reiterate Councilmember Searcy's interest in revisiting the emergency powers ordinance. I think, just given that we have gotten pretty comfortable using the digital platforms, and also vaccine rates are getting higher. And I think we're just in a different position than we were a year ago, which is really, really great. So I'd just like to take another look at that. Two quick updates. I have been working with DDOT to schedule a meeting in what has been sort of an epic ongoing struggle to find a time when people can meet. I think it has been going on for about 4 months of trying to schedule this meeting, but we are, I think, very close, and I'm going to hopefully meet with DDOT and DC Councilmember Louis George and her staff next week to learn a little bit more about the Eastern Avenue project that they have been working on for a long, long time and was supposed to launch next year, this year, next year, somewhere around there, and now has been pushed back again. So I'm interested to hear more about that and what we can do to see if we can get some improvements to the street quality before that, since it has been pushed back. I really want to thank Councilmember Louis George and her staff for being super supportive in our work to connect with DDOT. It's been extremely helpful, and hopefully I'll have some more information to share next week on that. And then secondly, I know I've been talking quite a bit about this, but just want to let everyone know the TPB has been working on the long range transportation plan, Visualize 2045. And we have another work session next Wednesday where we'll be delving deeply into the Maryland projects in particular that are part of the proposed plan. So if anyone has thoughts on that or any questions, please reach out to me before next Wednesday. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Just a couple of things. One, I do want to thank the Ward 1 residents who came by today when I was having my outdoor office hours in the Laurel Avenue streetery, the public area near the post office. And it seemed like a decent way to do that as we transition away from pandemic restrictions. And I was pleased that a number of people, one was a council member, but there were actually Ward 1 residents also who stopped by to talk, and I had a number of helpful discussions, and a number of them, though not all of them, were about the Junction project, and not to simply repeat what my colleagues have said, but I do think my general orientation is towards sharing information and trying to be transparent and letting people know what I think in cases when there's a lawsuit going on, a complex one at that. I think there are limitations on what we can say that it's important to abide by in order to, I think, help promote a positive resolution of the situation. So that's the spirit, I think, in which we have been less able than we might like to be forthcoming. And I hope people can appreciate that on some level, even if it is, as Mr. Siemens and others said, frustrating. Just one other thing I wanted to mention, the Council of Governments COG committee that I'm on is the one that deals with air quality. And people may know, or they may not, that in general, our region complies with all the air quality standards that we're supposed to, with one exception, and that's ozone. And we have been just very slightly over the required ozone level. And so we're gearing up on the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, MWAC as it's called, to start delving into approaches that can help us to bring that down so that we'll be back into compliance. And as my colleague, Councilmember Kostick knows, some of that may involve interaction with the Transportation Planning Board as well, since obviously those things are connected. So as there's more information, I'll let people know, but there will be efforts to develop ways for jurisdictions in the region to take steps to help bring us just back under, to the extent we can get under at the required ozone threshold. So more to come on that as we go forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other council comments? All right, I have a couple this evening. Last night, the Deputy City Manager, Roz Grinsby, and Daniel Powers on the city staff, I forget Daniel's title, participated in a presentation from a group of University of Maryland students that Daniel and I have been working with this semester on their capstone project, looking at property assessments and the appeals process. We were able, thanks to the help of Delegate Charkoudian and Corman, to get SSTAT data for them to look at whether or not there are racial inequities in the appeals process and how property is assessed. It was a great presentation. Unfortunately, as those of us who work with large data sets sometimes face, the data was a bit dirtier than they thought going in. So they didn't quite finish up all their analysis, but it was a great project, and I hope that we'll get their final report, and I'll share that with the rest of the council. And we hope that the University of Maryland's iSchool would be interested in entertaining this for a fall project for their students. So we had been hoping to have them come and present to the full council, but the semester ended quickly and a number of the students are graduating. But we'll have something to you soon. I just really want to thank Daniel Powers. He was a great help to the students in figuring out some of the programming and figuring out how to match the SDAT data with census tract data. So more to come on that. I just want to thank the Deputy City Manager, Small Things Matters, and everyone who's putting together the vaccine clinic this Sunday from 10 to 3. It will be actually at our city building at 7500 Maple Avenue. And so I just, again, want to say thank you so much to our Deputy City Manager for the number of vaccine clinics and continued testing she's gotten and coordinated for the city. An update on the city manager search. This week, yesterday, the city council met and interviewed virtually 7 candidates. We have narrowed that down to about 2 or 3 finalists and setting up, as I mentioned during going over the agenda, the beginning of the meeting, final interviews next week. So more to come on that. Tax duplication, congratulations. We're getting there. It's not like in the bag, so we still need to make sure it is on the reconciliation list. But today was a historic day. A unanimous vote by our county council to address the issue of tax duplication and to put the $5 million that we were shortchanged in the original county executive budget back in the budget, so that we hopefully, if it gets through reconciliation, we will get that money and also have a plan to move forward to get the formulas fixed and particularly look at the police reimbursement and park maintenance reimbursement. So I just want to do a huge shout out to our city manager, Suzanne Ludlow, who has been really championing this. And I think a number of our county council members actually named her today as they talked about this issue. So congratulations. And I just want to say thank you also to all the residents who have been writing and organizing on this. I don't think we've ever in the history of working on this issue, seen the number of residents who really learned this issue and moved it forward. So thank you to all of them. I also want to thank Monique Ashford, who is on the city council in Rockville and is the incoming president of the Maryland Municipal League Montgomery County chapter, who has just been doing a huge amount of work in the last couple of weeks. So it was a great MoCo effort by the municipalities. So still more to do, and the city manager will talk a little bit about that. Another success for today, it was a banner day in Montgomery County. MDOT has dropped the plans to widen the Beltway east of 270 today. And so just want to say thank you also to County Council President Tom Hucker for his efforts on that. That was a great thing as well today. Let's see. I think that is it for me. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you. Yes, it's wonderful to have good news. It's terrific. I always start with COVID-19 related information, and all residents starting today, all residents 12 and older can get vaccinated, and the various websites from Montgomery County and the state of Maryland allow signups even for 12-year-olds. So please get vaccinated as soon as possible if you're not already. And as the mayor mentioned, Deputy City Manager Jessica Clark has been awesome in making sure that we get vaccination clinics in this area and having them work well. The logistics in this area are always tough, so it does take a lot of extra personal work, and appreciate that. But this is the time, make sure you get the vaccination. It feels wonderful to be able to be out and about with people and not worry in the ways that we had been worrying. So please take the time to do it. One of the questions that's come up has to do with the Tacoma Park Library and libraries in general and when they reopen. Montgomery County has announced that it will start opening some of its public libraries starting June 1st. The nearest one to Tacoma Park that would open is the downtown Silver Spring Library, but it's only by appointment and it's only on certain days, on certain hours. I'm sure that will change over time, but that's how it will start. So some folks have asked, well, what about the Tacoma Park Library? Are we going to reopen? How are we going to handle things? We will be permitted to be open, but we still have all of our city buildings are closed to the public, except for very limited services. We also have the situation where the library will go under construction. That's actually not going to happen until November. So we have a few months to work with and to consider some options. So we've been thinking and having a lot of discussions about how to handle it. Some of the factors that we're considering are kind of making sure that the services that are most needed are provided. And so people do need Wi-Fi, computer, and printer access for a variety of purposes, including studying. Councilmember Smith, mentioned that and has been very interested in it. These services are critical for our residents. We're working ways to find how to provide those services both here and in locations across the city. Between the existing city funds and the federal funds, we'll be able to get these out as quickly as possible. And I've included in the city manager comments a chart that wonderful Dan Powers was able to pull together, which shows computer and internet access by race in the city of Tacoma Park. And in particular, our Hispanic population is very low in having Wi-Fi access and computer access. So people of color in general are lower, but that is an area where we really do need to also think of some special services. Another thing that we're considering, people miss browsing books in libraries. I miss it. So many people miss it. It's not the same, but our talented librarians love to talk with residents and help browse for them to be able to expand the books and resources that they can get through Books to Go or book delivery. We really don't like the idea of having appointment-only library access because that does limit, it has a race disparity by having to make appointments. So we're investigating mobile and outdoor displays of books for browsing, and we may have some special visits inside the library as well that we arrange. So we're thinking about how to do that safely and equitably. And we know people want to gather in libraries and read and attend programs. Those are activities that are probably not going to be taking place within the library building itself. But again, as Councilmember Smith, the idea of wanting to gather, we want to have places across the city where where that gathering can take place and where we can have the outdoor Wi-Fi or other kind of Wi-Fi services. We want to be able to provide that. So we're working on it. Stay tuned. And I put in my notes, our librarians miss you just as much as you miss the library. They really do. It drives them nuts not to have the connections with residents that they've traditionally had. So keep tuned and we'll get the information out as soon as we have the plan. The mayor mentioned the county council supporting the GO committee recommendations on tax duplication. It was an amazing day. I've been working on it since 1998. The county council has not understood the subject until this year. A lot of that had to do with the fact that a lot of work was done by staff in the various municipalities and with the county on narrowing the focus of the topics. So it's a little bit easier to understand. But then the residents came through. The push by residents to let the county council members know how important it was to them was a tremendous difference. And I really applaud their pushing because it was consistent and persistent and very effective. So we did get what we wanted, which was the process going forward to be fixed. We have until October 1st for municipal representatives to work with county representatives to finalize formulas for police services and park maintenance for the FY23 budget and to allow for shared service rebates. There's an allocation of up to $5 million that could come for the additional in the FY22 budget. However, it's been categorized as a Category 2 list item. The definition that we've been given for a Category 2 item is that additions to the base budget that should be considered as soon as additional resources are available. During FY22, perhaps as early as this summer, the council can consider adding items from this list to the base budget if additional resources become available. What we need to push with the council president, Tom Pucker, is that we're the very first on that list. As soon as resources are available, that it gets allocated to that point. So we need to continue the pressure that it's identified as a high priority for those funds. It was a tremendous day, and I also appreciated how many different county council members wanted to speak to this, precisely because they've been hearing from residents. So they know they're on the hook. And so I really, again, appreciate the work by the MML chapter leadership, as well as our council members and our residents. Thank you so much. And I note, speaking of additional funding, we did receive, and thanks to Councilmember Dabala for being the first in the loop to get the guidance from the Treasury Department on Monday, about how to use American Rescue Plan Act funds. It's about 150 pages of guidance. We've been reading it. We've been attending webinars on how to interpret the guidance document. But there's some wonderful information in here, and I'd like to just note a couple aspects. Through the American Rescue Plan Act, which is the acronym is ARPA, Tacoma Park is expected to receive approximately $14.8 million in two tranches, $7.2 million likely next month, and then in a year, an additional $7.2 million. I would just like to note that we don't know that number precisely. The funds have gone to the state, they're to be passed through to the city, and they have rejiggered the numbers. So we don't know what our numbers are going to be until we get it. Our understanding is that it should be in a few days that we learn. I don't think it will be far from that number, but to be clear, we do not know the number at this moment. The programs and work that can be funded through the ARPA funds include the kinds of direct services to residents and businesses that have been hurt by the pandemic that we have been providing for through the COVID-19 fund in the city. But the amounts are much greater. The services that we can provide are broader than under the previous funds. We can also provide premium pay for certain essential workers. We can assist whole communities facing health disparities. We can provide mental health, internet access. Some of the things are interesting: community approaches to reduce violence, workforce development. So very interesting kinds of programs that can be funded through these funds. In addition, we can invest in infrastructure improvements, stormwater infrastructure. That's a huge benefit for the city. We can improve public buildings that don't meet COVID standards, such as locations that have dense work sites. And that is a perfect match to our atrium project within the city building, where we really have a problem with where our dispatch are located. We can do affordable housing development with these funds. We can also do road construction and other infrastructure improvements if they are the projects that we would normally pay out of regular tax funds, which is what we do. We don't bond for them or that kind of thing. So we're getting more information about how we work on those things, but that's a much broader than the original law seemed to imply. I'm very pleased that that's in the guidance. However, a key provision for most of the uses of these funds is that the funds need to go to communities, businesses, and nonprofits that were hardest hit by the pandemic. And the amounts provided should be reasonably related to the harm that had been done to them. And so even with stormwater funding, there's references to, you don't just give it to areas where that wasn't, they weren't negatively impacted by the pandemic. So just really thinking about how the criteria matches those concerns. from a manager's perspective, and I know I'm not going to be the one managing it, but from the manager's perspective, I'm so excited that these are not onerous funds to use for small municipalities. We're giving the money up front. It's not a reimbursement, so we don't have to spend the funds first and then file the paperwork to get reimbursed. And we don't have to file quarterly reports, just an annual report because of the size that we are. Larger municipalities and counties and states have quarterly reports. And I'm really pleased that we just have to do the October 31st annual report. Now that's the same time the CAFR's prepared. So October's a rough month, but at least it's just one time a year. One of the terrific things that was in this guidance was that although the funds in the original law, it looked like the funds needed to be spent by December 31st, 2024. The guidance says the funds must be obligated by that date, but they can be spent up to December 31st, 2026. That's tremendous for allowing us to do big projects. That's tremendous for us, giving us some time to prioritize how we spend these funds so that it's done thoughtfully and systematically and not a feeling like we have to completely rush. We are able to think this through and follow on a regular process. So really good information so far, but we have a lot more to learn. And as I said, we haven't got the money yet. So we're gonna continue to keep you informed about those things. So those are my comments. I do have budget comments for tonight, and I don't know if anybody has questions for me before I do that, because I know we're turning to a budget in a moment. Any other questions?
No, but I actually forgot to mention something when I did my public comments. Sorry, it's been a long week.
Sure.
I have asked the city attorney, he's been a bit busy lately, but after, I can't remember, it was Councilman Searcy or Costick who first raised this a week or so ago regarding the city manager's emergency powers. So I have put a request into the city attorney on the process for that. So apologies, I forgot to mention that.
If I could just mention one other thing, and I didn't want to say anything earlier because I knew there would be all the detail on from the mayor and from the city manager about the tax duplication, but it really, and I know it's not final and there's still plenty more steps to go, but it's really a good illustration of how working at a lot of different levels, the chapter of the state organization, elected officials, but also residents all sort of flowing together. When we passed the resolution and then the mayor later testified, I think that gave some documents that were useful organizing tools, and then the staff work behind the scenes also was crucial. But I think having a lot more people, and I did hear from a lot of people in the part of the city that I cover who did send in emails. And I think the challenge has always been, well, who can become an expert on this topic enough to really write in a convincing way that you think will be effective to county council members. But I think our resolution and some of the other things gave a simpler way for people to do that. So I just think it's a really good example of how all these things can work together. And again, I know it's not like we have the money in our pockets yet, but I just wanted to say that I was really glad to see all that kind of confluence of all those actions by all those actors come together in a positive way.
It really was amazing, and I'm really happy that happened. Before we turn over to the budget, I guess I want to share my thoughts on the budget, and especially since it's my final budget. So I wanted to note that on April 7th, I presented the proposed FY22 city budget to you. And tonight, you'll be looking at adopting the first reading of the FY22 budget ordinances for the city. The theme of my recommended budget was planning for a new day. With vaccinations now widely available and federal funds coming to help communities recover from the health and economic impacts of the pandemic, that new day is truly in sight. With this adopted budget, the council is building on those positive signs by providing the foundation and tools for staff and a new city manager to meet the needs of the coming year. As I noted in my budget transmittal message, preparation of the city's budget each year is a Herculean task. Fortunately, the city has a remarkably skilled, dedicated staff who do much, much more than is indicated by their job titles. Thank you to Finance Director Susan Chung. She keeps the financial systems of the city safe, provides wise advice to managers, and coordinates the budget preparation process each year. Thank you to Deputy City Manager Jessica Clark, who brought her own budgeting experience to the city a year ago and has greatly improved our internal processes. Thank you as well to Budget and Accounting Manager Ron Kowali, Communications Specialist Donna Wright, and all of our department heads for their hard work. The city has won the prestigious Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association for the last 3 years because of their work and due to the commitment to budget transparency of the City Council. My work preparing, presenting, and improving the budget each year and ensuring the continued excellent financial management of the city are the elements I'm most proud of regarding my service for the City of Tacoma Park as City Manager. Thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Thank you very much. Councilman Dabala, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry I wasn't quick enough. Thank you, Ms. Ludlow, for that set of comments. But before you did that, you were talking about the ARPA money, and I think I might have missed it. Is there a plan or schedule yet for when the city staff, the city council, and ultimately the public will be able to hear what the options are for using this money for our city and to be able to discuss it? Or are we, I know we just got the guidance 48 hours ago because I'm the one that, as you said, got it first, but I'm wondering if we know yet what that planning process is going to look like.
We don't have it sketched out exactly. Staff will be meeting next week to go through and try to put the various things that have been on the various wish lists into criteria. And match that up so that we have a kind of a working structure with which to gauge these. But I'll need to work with you in identifying a schedule for how that gets discussed and what the process is for making some decisions with it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. All right, so then we will go to our voting session. Our first item tonight is the first reading ordinance adopting our FY 2022 tax rates. Would someone like to move that ordinance? Councilmember Siemens moved, Councilwoman Searcy second. Any comments on the tax rate ordinance? The tax rate is staying the same as last year's tax rate. Seeing no comments, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Okay. Councilmember Dabala.
Aye.
Councilmember Costick.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right. Next, we need to vote to go into to become the Stormwater Management Board. Would someone like to move a motion to become the Stormwater Management Board? Councilman Dabala moved, Councilman Costa second. Any questions or comments? All right, the clerk call the vote on moving into the Stormwater Board.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala.
Management budget, would someone like to move that? Councilwoman Searcy moved, Councilman Costick second. I do believe we have an amendment to the ordinance. Councilman Costick, do you want to propose an amendment?
I do, yes. I don't actually have the language in front of me, but I had asked a question about the cap that we had agreed previously to include for this year, the $275 cap. And I noticed that was not included in the ordinance. So I had just emailed staff and asked about it. And I'd like to add something clarifying that. I'm not sure exactly what the most appropriate language is for that.
So I think we can simply have an additional section that says, at least for fiscal year 2022, the cap on the charge will be $275. So I think we could kind of say that now, and then we'll have the revised language ready for you for the second reading.
Great. Do I have a second for that amendment? Councilwoman Searcy, second. Any comments or questions on the proposed amendment? Seeing none, will the clerk call the vote on the amendment?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay, now we will go to our overall ordinance adopting the FY 2022 budget. There were some changes recommended. I believe they're all consistent with some of the conversations that council has had. So if,
I'm sorry, quick question. Did you vote on the stormwater budget?
did I just vote on the amendment?
I think you
Sorry.
just voted on the amendment.
Sorry,
Yeah.
lost track. Doing too quickly. All right. Who is? But we
Yes, there
already
was a-
moved it, so we just had the vote. So will the clerk call the vote?
I'm sorry, there was a vote on the amendment, I thought.
Right, but
I
the
just
ordinance, the
thought that-
stormwater management budget
Ordinance.
ordinance, we did not vote on.
No, I thought you were going to talk about amendments, but no additional.
No, we just did that. I don't think it is. Oh, sorry. Does
Ms.
anyone have any
Ludlow,
other?
did you?
I don't know any other
additions?
amendments to the stormwater.
That was all.
That was it.
Okay, good. So I'll call the vote on the amended stormwater ordinance. Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
No.
Councilmember, I'm sorry, did you say no?
Yes. I said no.
Thank you. Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right. So now we're going to our ordinance on the FY 2022 budget, and there are a couple of proposed changes. Again, I don't think any of these are changes that are outside of some of the things that council discussed. So I'd like to discuss these before we move the ordinance. So the first change was proposed by Councilmember Kovar, and it is in the 11th whereas clause. This is one regarding the ARPA funds. I will read it for folks so you can follow along. It's whereas for this reason, the city council will work closely with the city manager to determine the use of ARPA funds following the guidelines created by the Department of Treasury with a spending plan that helps households, small businesses, and nonprofits respond to public health emergency and its negative economic impacts while making strategic investments in the city's workforce. And we have public infrastructure, but the proposal is to strike public and just have infrastructure and fiscal health. Councilmember Kovar, do you want to say why you would like to strike public there?
Yes, and it's a small thing, I know, but I appreciate my colleagues considering it. I don't normally like to remove the public from our discussions, but the reason for that is, and the city manager just outlined this, there's at least a possibility, and I think we need to learn more precisely from the US Treasury Department about how the funds can be used, but there's at least a possibility that stormwater funds could be used in ways that could benefit private property owners as well as public areas where we typically do our stormwater work. And so we have in the budget $150,000 to start the process of looking into some of the impacts of increased stormwater flow connected to more intense rainstorms connected in turn to climate change. I don't want us to close off the opportunity to potentially use ARPA funds in ways that could benefit private property. And in fact, by saying infrastructure instead of public infrastructure, the same point could apply to broadband, because people will recall that in the ARPA legislation, it talks about not only water infrastructure, but also broadband infrastructure. So this is just a way of not closing off opportunities that could directly or indirectly benefit private property or private residence as well as the public. So that's the purpose, just to drop that one word.
Councilman Searcy?
I just want to make sure that again, I know that we're learning about ARPA by the minute, right? But there was one point that the city manager made about, making sure that households that we're working to impact are those who have been negatively impacted as a result of the pandemic. So I guess what I'm wondering is, does the lead-in language in terms of a spending plan that helps households, small businesses, and nonprofits respond to public health emergencies and negative blah 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 blah. Is that sufficient, or would we consider stormwater work on private property that perhaps for those individuals that may have not been negatively impacted as a result of the pandemic, could that be, and it's outside of public infrastructure, would that be the appropriate use of ARPA funds?
So we can't tell the federal government how their funds can be used. We can only use the funds in the ways that they let us use it. What I'm saying is I don't want to close off an opportunity that may exist.
So in my view, I think that the language is fine, Councilmember Searcy. I think the information about how you direct these resources will be at a later time when you're actually working with the various items. So I think this language is broad enough and it does not need to be more specific.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Devala?
To that point, I was going to ask earlier if one of the very first things the city is going to do is look more closely at that section and do some kind of analysis as to what parts of the city or what types of residents or what types of businesses or all of the above, none of the above, look at that section, not just because of stormwater, but for all of the purposes. So I was going to ask at a separate point if we could put that on the wish list and kind of put it up toward the top.
It's on the list.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's stay focused on the budget ordinance.
Right. And so I was essentially agreeing with Councilmember Searcy about the importance of looking at that. But for what I understood Councilmember Kovar's point to be is the more traditional distinction of public as in the street infrastructure versus private as in helping to find how the water flows through private property that's not literally in the public space in the street. So I think he meant that distinction, not the one that's in the ARPA.
So I think not to speak for Councilmember Kovar, but I think it's just to give us more flexibility on how our funds can be spent moving forward and not to restrict ourselves right now.
Yeah, and again, I would say this is a whereas clause. I don't want to twist ourselves in knots over something that's not binding. It's more just about sending the signal of how broadly or tightly we at this point think we may use them. That's really the purpose.
And I support the change.
Great. All right. So then that was Councilmember Kovar. Councilman Kostick provided some wording changes. I can read those as well. And again, I think these are consistent with the discussions we've had, but stop me if they're not. I'm in the 12th whereas clause, which is right underneath the one we were discussing. The suggestion is to say, whereas the city council, and this is new language, is committed to reviewing and reforming the city's approach to public safety and has established, and then it continues. So adding that language to the beginning. Any objections to that? Okay, and then the other addition is at the end of that same whereas clause, where it says, and changes to certain divisions or units within the police department or other city departments, such as removal of the K-9 unit and changes to code enforcement. So and code enforcement there. Okay, seeing no objections. Moving down to the 13th whereas clause. This one reads, whereas the city council anticipates receiving recommendations from the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. Right now, we have in June of 2021. In particular, I'm going to ask Councilman Searcy if she thinks we should keep June of 2021 or put summer of 2021, just because I know the task force is looking at adding some meetings and things like that, if that might be more appropriate.
Yes, I think summer would be more appropriate and provide us with the most flexibility.
Okay, so we will change that to summer, and then Councilman Costick's other suggestion is right after that, add and may seek to make changes to the city's approach to public safety, and then continue on there. So I think those are all consistent with where we have been as a council, and thank Councilman Costick for the additional wording suggestions. I received no other suggestions regarding changes to the ordinance, so I will ask if someone would like to move the ordinance with the changes just discussed.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Could I ask a question? After we move the ordinance, would there be an opportunity just to make a couple of general comments? I'm not sure where we are and.
Oh, yeah, no, we always do after we vote.
After we move, okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to instead of voting on each of those separately as amendments, I thought they were all pretty friendly and consistent, so did that way. All right, so who wants to move the ordinance with the changes we discussed? Councilmember Kovar, do I have a second? Councilmember Siemens seconds. All right, now Councilmember Kovar, you can speak to the budget.
Yes, thank you. And just briefly, a few points. I appreciate all the work that went into it and the good discussions on the council and with the colleagues on it. I think that, to me, well, I had thought about whether we could bring the tax rate lower. We ended up with the same rate we've had for the last 2 years. That's 3 straight years. And in the time that I've been on the council, the rate has gone down all but 1 year, and it's still below the level when I came on. And so I understand that varies from person to person, the impact of that, depending on the reassessment. We won't get another round of reassessments until after this tax rate goes into effect for this fiscal year. So when the assessments next change, and maybe the mayor's group of students will have something to do about that in terms of how the assessment process works, then we'll see what the impact is. But I think to have 3 straight years where it stayed the same isn't bad. One of my biggest priorities otherwise was trying to get some money in for stormwater. And so whatever happens with ARPA, we do have 150,000 in for out of the city budget to, I hope, be able to be used to begin to look into the challenges that are being caused in terms of stormwater on private property connected to climate change. I think that was a really important priority. And then with the reductions that we were able to make, and then the additions back in some areas like climate change, some additional funds potentially for police reform, tree planting and under treat areas, et cetera, a pilot program for that. I think on balance, it ended up that a number of our priorities, including a little bit for library services and racial equity as well, and the ambassador/navigator idea to improve engagement. I think it ended up with a good addition of several key priorities that many of us have talked about, and still keeping the rate the same. So to me, I think we ended up overall on balance in a good place with the budget, which is why I do support it. And I would just say in terms of the police, there's really 3 options there, depending on when the task force recommendations come out, and this is touched on in the whereas clauses we were just talking about. One thing is we did add some funds during our reconciliation, potentially for the implementation of their recommendations. Secondly, we always have the ability to change the budget mid-course if we decide to. The operations portion of the police budget did go down, even though the personnel piece went up. And then third, we have the potential for ARPA funds. So I do feel like both with respect to stormwater and police reform, that we're positioned to be able to do more going forward. And I think those were 2 of the top priorities for me in the budget. So again, I support it, and I appreciate everybody's work on it. Thanks. I'll go mute.
Sorry, I was muted, Councilman Costick.
Thanks, no problem. So just a couple of very quick comments on the budget. First of all, want to give a huge thank you for all of the work that the city manager, deputy city manager, finance director, everyone in finance and all of the department heads and many others have spent an incredible amount of time on the budget, and not just on the budget, but on answering the many questions that come from all of us. And I know I'm a prime offender on that, even today, sending a number of questions. So just really want to thank you all. It's extremely helpful to get those answers. And I know it's a lot of work, but I feel like overall we've come to a good place with this budget. I think we're adopting a budget that is going to address a number of the issues that are important to the city. And there's some new funds to specifically address things like the stormwater issues that many residents are dealing with, racial equity improvements in the city, and the community ambassadors program, library services, economic development. I think we have a lot of exciting opportunities. So I'm very much looking forward to the projects and initiatives that will come out of that in the future. And on top of that, obviously we'll have the ARPA funds, and we'll have some robust discussions about that and considerations. But even before we get those, I think we're set up very well with our budget, the way we are adopting it. I know previously I had talked a little bit about the police budget, and I am still disappointed that we aren't in a place to make additional changes right now. But I think that is the nature of the timing. And I think it's very important that we make changes in a thoughtful way, and that we do receive those Reimagining Public Safety Task Force recommendations to inform that work. And so I appreciate the many staff members, the chief and others who took a deep dive in answering questions that I and others had about the police department budget. And I think, as Councilmember Kovar said, we'll be looking more at this, and we can make budget amendments and use ARPA funds in the coming year and years to begin to more reimagine public safety and address this priority in the community. So thank you all, and appreciate all the work.
Councilmember Smith.
First, I'd like to say thank staff for all their hard work putting the budget together. I know it's a yeoman's task, but I have to say that I am disappointed that more money is not provided during the reconciliation process for library services. I think that is important, especially once the library goes under construction. I'm also disappointed in the terms racial justice and racial equity. I still don't understand what those terms mean in these documents and with this council. Sonia Sanchez say, how does this free Black people? I don't know how, by using these words, we make the outcomes for Black people better in this community. So I hope that we do better. I hope that we spend the resources to actually improve the quality of life for Black and brown people in this community, rather than just giving statements. Thank you.
Great. Any other council comments on the budget? I just want to add my thanks to the staff and thank the city manager. This is your very last budget for the city of Takoma Park. Thank you very much for all your work on this, to my council colleagues for all their work and effort on this budget. I think it, as Councilmember Kovar stated, and my colleagues, I won't restate things. I think it puts us in a really solid place moving forward. I think we budgeted for some things that our staff can start working on right away. I'm glad that we included particularly the money for the tree canopy pilot and other things that we had to push off a little bit last year because we did not know what COVID-19 was going to bring us. And I know on some other things, we're not quite as far as we had hoped to be, but really looking forward to the completion of the work of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force and other efforts. And so hopefully what we budgeted provides the staff ways to move forward on our key priorities. And then once we allocate the ARPA funds, I think we're in a good, solid place. So thank you everyone for your work. And I will ask the city clerk to call the vote.
All right, Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay, next we have a consent agenda that includes a number of purchase items with someone on the closure of Ann Street for the summer mercado. Would someone like to move the consent agenda? Councilman Searcy moved. Do I have a second? Councilman Siemens, second. Will the clerk call the vote?
Yes, Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Smith. Sorry,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Thank you. All right, next we're moving to our work session. The first item in our work session is a request from Laura Barkley, the Executive Director of the Old Town Business Association, to close the west side of Laurel Avenue on Friday, May 28th from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. The closure would enable the association to host the Washington National Opera's Opera Truck for a 30-minute performance. The additional time needed is for the setup and breakdown of the mini attached stage. Ms. Barkley has applied for a letter of approval from the Montgomery County Health Department to ensure the performance can be accomplished safely under current COVID-19 protocols. And our approval would be contingent upon the health department's response. So today is just the work session. We'll be voting on this next week. Does anyone, Ms. Barkley did send us an email on this because she was unable to attend the council meeting tonight, but does anyone have any questions that staff may be able to answer or that we could send to Ms. Barkley? No, seeing none, we will bring this back next week for a vote. And that takes us to our next item tonight. And we have our subcommittee on committees. Councilman Searcy, Costick, and Dabala are up to talk to us more about committees. Oh, actually, Ms. Grinsby is, I think, up first. And our city clerk, correct? Am I turning over to both of you?
I'm not sure of the order. I'm happy to go first.
All right.
Sure, unless Councilmember Dabala wanted to, or one of the other subcommittee members wanted to start it off, and then we could start, however you want to handle it. All right, it sounds like it's.
Wait a minute. I don't know what's happening. I think Dabala may be having some technical difficulties, and I'm not going to share the screen just yet. But just to kind of give you all the lay of the land for tonight. So we are continuing to make progress as it relates to our review of committees. And so tonight we will do 4 things. First, you will hear from Roz Grisby and our city clerk, Jesse Carpenter, on progress on the administrative recommendations in terms of the handbook and orientation. We'll also talk about, again, recap the general purposes and factors that we are considering for prioritizing the need for specific standing committees. We will do a quick recap and review last week's recommendations for 3 non-regulatory standing committees. And then we would discuss recommendations for a few of the remaining committees. So just to kind of give everyone a little bit of orientation around what we're going to talk about tonight. That's what we're going to cover. And with that, I will turn things over to the city clerk and Ms. Grisby to kind of talk about some of the administrative recommendations.
Thank you. And I will share my screen Can you all see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
So, Jesse Carpenter, the city clerk, and I have been putting together some information for council regarding how committees function as part of the broader council review. And I wanted to say, if you have questions or suggestions as we go along, please jump in and let us know, because we really wanted this to be a conversation as part of the effort to improve and strengthen council appointed committees. The committee review process has included a focus on ways to streamline and systematize how committees function, the kind of nuts and bolts piece of it. The objective has been to review the existing structure and processes of appointment, and then to recommend changes to increase effectiveness and efficiencies, and to explore innovative ways to engage residents more fully and attract new members. So tonight's focus is really on the operations. We want to talk specifically about improving functioning and operations of committees, as well as the support and resources that staff could provide in the process. We're developing an orientation for committee members and for chairs. And I think your agenda packet includes a draft table of contents for a handbook, which would accompany the orientation that we're working on. I'm a little disoriented because I have half my screen blocked by pictures of council. I'm sorry. So Jesse will cover this part of the presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Roz. The council has completed some steps and is working on some steps related to this, to committees. The council adopted a code of conduct in October 2020, and the process to report and address violations is under development. The city manager is working on that, and we expect that she'll be able to have that shortly. And the council, of course, has been working on standardization of committee structure and the code update. Council work on that is in process. So for tonight, we wanted to, as Roz mentioned, work on the provide information on what we're developing for as an outline for orientation and a handbook that would accompany the orientation for committee members. So we'll go into the next slide. So thanks to Council Member DeBala's reminder that committee members sometimes need basic information about city government, and we forget that sometimes. But so first in the orientation, we wanted to provide information on Tacoma Park Government 101, sharing the, among other things, the organizational chart, information on the council manager form of government, information on the mayor and council, who they are, terms, how they're elected, and a map of city wards. I think sometimes people just don't always know these things that we take for granted. An overview of city committees, information on the role of the city manager, kind of orient people to the city charter and city code, which is online, and those are the guiding documents for the city. Show people how to find the city budget to get that sort of information, and just orient them to the city website. And of course, this won't be, we won't dwell on these things, but I think it probably is important to give everyone that basic knowledge about city government, because not everybody comes in with the same level of experience with Tacoma Park.
Excuse me, may I make a comment while we're on that slide?
Please.
Should we include a little blurb about the relationship of the city manager to the whole process? Not the city manager, I'm sorry, the city attorney.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely it's on the organizational chart, but you're right, we can certainly include the city attorney.
slightly different role. I mean, it's a
Exactly.
different relationship.
Yeah, good point. We will add that information. Thank you. So moving on to the next set of information we would propose to share is your basic information on the state requirements, the Maryland Open Meetings Act. And we would recommend that at least committee chairs actually do the online training that's available from the state. And then also provide a brief introduction to the Maryland Public Information Act, mainly because community members may not realize that the information that they're communicating with each other via email that's committee business is actually subject to disclosure under the Public Information Act. Not that it typically is, but there's always that possibility. Then we would review the code of conduct and responsibilities to report violations. Then talk a little bit about ethics, the ethics ordinance, and including the requirement that we already have to report gifts annually, if there are any gifts received by committee members, and how to report conflicts of interest, or how to ask questions as to whether there are conflicts of interest. And I recommend that we ask the Ethics Commission to develop a plain language ethics frequently asked questions that would be helpful for committee members, just so to pinpoint the important points that would be helpful for committee members. And then finally, we would propose orienting committee members to the city's focus on race equity and either develop training or consider hiring a consultant or trainer to provide training for committee members. And that's all to be, certainly that's something to be delved into a little bit more over time, but it's an important, it's a central focus of the city's work, and we want committee members to be part of that as well. Are there any questions related to the information on this slide? Okay, since I don't see any, I think Ms. Grigsby, Ms. Dabala, council member, did you have a question or a comment?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if, so the orientation makes a great deal, all of this makes a great deal of sense to me because people have asked me these questions over time as they've been committee members. I'm assuming by handbook, you all mean something that's online, that's flexible and not literally a handbook that's published. Okay.
For sure. I mean, yes. Is there any such thing anymore as a paper handbook? I think those days are past us, I fear.
Okay. Great, thank you.
But certainly something that's really flexible and could be changed from year to year.
Thank you.
So Ms. Grigsby will take the next set of slides.
So now we are really getting into some of the nuts and bolts. Our objective here is to provide committee members and committee chairs with a standard approach regarding many aspects of how a committee actually functions. Some of this is the housekeeping piece. The goal is to empower people to focus on what council has identified as their priorities and purpose of the committee, and not get bogged down in some of the housekeeping and requirements and parts that might be intimidating for people who didn't come out of student council and may not have that familiarity. So we would start with elections of officers and what those responsibilities are and how the committee goes about doing that. We propose having model agendas and minutes, ways of simplifying the process so it's not intimidating for folks. And then there's a whole category of things to help meetings run smoothly and keep them on track and keep people engaged. So everything from a simplified Robert's Rules of Order, so people don't get bogged down, and to something like ending the meeting on time, which can be really essential for folks juggling a lot of other responsibilities as well. We are also including the possible training for conflict management for chairs, because that might help head off some kinds of problems that arise with engaged people that feel passionately about things. And it also helps people who are put off by conflict to engage in committees where they have a passion and an interest and want to make a difference and not get caught in other kinds of noise. We currently have resources available for committees, and we'd like to make that clear. I'm not sure all committee members or chairs quite understand how this works, but all the committees are staffed, and we have resources to cover routine expenditures. Sometimes that's something like photocopying or getting a translation of a flyer that a committee is doing. We have the opportunity for special requests for staff time or resources. So that can be a more involved request, but it is something that is possible. And then, of course, we have web pages on the city website now that are used for purpose and code, but also for minutes and agendas and a repository of documents that a committee may develop. And then finally, we have recommendations that have come out of the committee survey, staff input, some of our background research on more broadly on best practices of ways to address things that might be obstacles for people to participate in committees and allow for more engagement and perhaps a more representative group of people engaging in committees. So there are some cost implications for some of the items on this list. Some we're already doing now, the remote participation, of course, and audiovisual support. Anything that's required to meet our ADA requirements we're doing now, on down to childcare, transportation, passable laptops or hotspot access, that kind of thing. So these are for council consideration. Obviously, these would be part of the orientation if council decides to move forward on these, and you can pick any of those as you choose. It seems that as part of the effort to engage a broad committee membership that's more representative of the broad population of Tacoma Park, we wanted to look at what might be additional obstacles for people to actually engage. So these are really recommendations for individual committee member support. The other things we've talked about previously are really how to make committees as a group function better. But these may be supports for individuals who could then engage in council appointed committees. And I think we're open for discussion then.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. On the slide right before this, I know one of the other things that has been discussed over the last couple of years as we've looked at committees is possibly looking into a stipend for committee members. And I know if that was something we wanted to keep on the list for the time being, or if there are any thoughts on that.
Are you asking staff?
I guess so, because it's not on the list anymore.
It's not on the list. That's true. It has been on and off the list. I think we didn't want to be, I guess, presumptuous about thinking that council would go that direction. We can certainly add it back in. I don't think it was a deliberate removal of it for policy decisions, but I think it makes sense to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would like to have it on the list, and I know figuring out like how we would do it in a system, we'd have to think about that. But I believe if I'm the city clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, College Park does provide stipends to their committee members, correct?
For some, not for
some.
every committee, but for some they do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there are some other municipalities we might be able to look at what they do and consider that. So I'd like to keep it on the list if we can. I see Councilman Costick and Dabala. And then CRC, the whole committee.
Of course, we all have opinions on this. Thank you so much for the presentation and all this information. Just a couple of thoughts on this list. I agree. I'd like to do some further digging on stipends and see what we could potentially add there and what the best structure would be. I know one other thing we've talked about a little bit is not just the idea of individual remote participation, but actually having meetings in different locations. And I know that's difficult because of the Open Meetings Act requirements, but is it possible if those meetings are noticed for them to be in a private place, or do they actually have to be in a public building? Like, could they be in a meeting room in one of the larger apartment buildings?
Sure, I can tackle that. Yeah, it would be perfectly permissible to have a meeting in a location like that, as long as it is publicly accessible.
Okay.
So if it's in a meeting room in an apartment building, anyone who wanted to view the meeting would need to be able to have access. And just as we do, I think it doesn't necessarily mean the door has to be open, but people have to be able to get in one way or another. It can't be closed to the public.
Okay.
It also needs to meet ADA requirements.
Yes, good point.
Yeah, I'd like to see more exploration of how that could be done, because I do think that could help just first of all, move the committee around the community a little more, which might be valuable for their considerations, and also just provide more opportunity for people to learn about the committee and connect with the committee and attend the meetings if they are members as well. The other thing that struck me with regard to childcare, which I think is really important, is that I also think part of making the meetings more open to a range of the community is just changing the culture within the committee meetings also. I know I attended one of the recreation committee meetings back when we could meet in person, and was just really struck by how they created kind of an open, friendly environment. They brought some food, people were sharing. One of the members brought their child to the meeting, and it just felt much more like a place that everybody could participate and was welcome. And I think maybe that is not, that's not necessarily a typical meeting vibe you might get in a public meeting, but I think there's a lot of value in that sort of welcoming of children to potentially be a part of the meeting or do their homework in the corner while the meeting happens, or whatever else, in a way that could allow other people to take part in the meetings without necessarily having childcare directly. And then finally, a recommendation that a resident made to me that I thought might be valuable is after going through, I think it was the slide, one or two slides before this, where you talked about the orientation process and some of the training on conflict management, for example. A recommendation was to give people that orientation and then also give them an opportunity to choose to opt out if they're not comfortable after learning some of that information and the expectations of them, particularly if someone is not comfortable committing to being respectful as a member of the committee, for example, or doing some of the things we expect committee members to do, to give people just a chance to understand that. And if that's not the approach that they want to take, then say, okay, I'm going to opt out. And I would certainly hope most people would not do that, but it might be kind of a useful commitment step that people might make to commit to doing that afterwards.
We've even talked about the possibility of including some of the information in the application process, so people see the code of conduct before they apply and they understand what the expectation is. But I think that it may be useful to also have a step after an orientation to say, does this still seem like something you want to be doing?
So another thought I have is that maybe the orientation doesn't need to be only for committee members, for new committee members. It could be, I'm not exactly sure how we do this, but open to potential members as well. So maybe you're thinking about it in the future. You haven't taken that step now, but you could attend the orientation to get us, it would give you a really good sense of what it might be like to serve in addition to attending meetings.
I really like that idea, Ms. Carpenter. And I think one of the things that we've been talking about is going to, what was it, twice a year, recruiting people. And I think I think that might also get more interest in the, in committees if we make a bigger deal about like, it's time to apply for committees. And we have like, it's almost like, was it like when you go back to school, they have the day where all the clubs come out and say,
house,
right, join us. I just think that could be a good night. We could do maybe a shortened orientation and then have some of the committees kind of, talk about themselves or and what they do.
Yeah. So there's a balance between fun and welcoming and serious and code of conduct. And there's a balance there.
But I think having a committee fair is a great idea. It's something we've talked about internally.
Yeah.
So people can understand what actually fits best with what their interests are and can see the array of options.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also just for people who aren't even on the committees, it helps them know also what committees are even out there.
Mm-hmm. Should I stop sharing? Are we done with this?
I think so. Yeah, I think we could pull it back up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. Councilman Dabala. I don't know. Yeah, Dabala's next and then Circe. Sorry, I lost track. You're muted.
I'll make this brief so other people can have an opportunity to share. I was going to ask also about the timing of this, and so my thought was similar that this is, I think, theoretically twice a year when there are new members or right before there are new members to attract new members. That's a great concept, and I'm less concerned about that. The formal handbook, and I'm more concerned about making sure we actually have the orientations at a time and a place and well promoted that people are able to make it. Because I love the content. I think this is really going to help folks to feel more adjusted as they start committee work. And I had a question also about drawing from, somebody mentioned College Park, drawing from examples around the region and also just within the city, some of the things some of the committees do. One committee already has job descriptions. One committee already has food and they could get reimbursed for that food. I didn't know that till tonight. So this is good. And maybe drawing from what is already working as a way to present the information. I think the racial equity work is really important. The training is really important, and we'll have to figure out what the best way to do that is. But I think this sounds great. And can you do one in June or July? Because aren't we just about to recruit a whole new batch of people? Just a thought.
We talked about this a little bit, and I think what we're really talking about for the full-blown program is September.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could do something if we're really aiming to do the recruitment on the initial schedule. But I think more realistic
September
is September.
Okay, good to know. Mm-hmm. Great.
But we could also I think we can have some of the online handbook available before then, so we can start getting resources in people's hands as quickly as we can. But I think the full orientation, I agree with Jesse. We're really probably looking at September.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilman Searcy.
Great. Thank you so much for working on this. I think this is awesome. One question, I actually have a similar question to Councilmember Dabala regarding timing and as it relates to that last slide when you kind of walk through what some of the other supports or things that we might be able to institute that would eliminate or alleviate some of the barriers that folks in the community may have to participating in the committees. And I started to think about, well, what are some of the low hanging fruit that we could just do, right? Because there are some on that list that may be more challenging to do. So like figuring out the childcare piece could be challenging. It could be, are we talking about providing childcare on site during all committee meetings? Are we working with the rec department? Who will need to be there? Will be, that requires a little bit more coordination than say, use Zoom. We'll make sure every committee has a Zoom account. So do you all have any recommendations in terms of what are some of those low-hanging fruit items that we might be able to implement soon-ish? In terms of some of those, some of the other, things that we might be able to do to make it easier for folks to participate.
So I think some of these we are able to do now, but we may not know that there's a need and committees may not know that they can ask. So certainly remote participation and we imagine some form of a hybrid meeting structure moving forward, at least in the near future and maybe always. I think we've seen there's some advantages to that. Certainly the ADA kinds of supports we can do now, we do now if we know there's a need. I think we can do more in terms of translation of materials now. That's not a difficult one. Again, we don't always know when the need is. The language interpretation during a meeting in real time is a more challenging piece, I think.
So I would encourage us, because I know we haven't talked about, necessarily done a deep dive in the application and whether or not there needs to be any updates to the application for committees. But if there's some specific things that we think we may be able to offer, maybe looking at our current applications, do we want to just ask people when they're signing up, will you need, remote access to meetings? Will you need, some of those, again, do you need access to childcare? Some of those low hanging fruit things that we think we may be able to feasibly do, trying to figure out how to work it into the application itself so that you would have a better idea in terms of what the needs are.
Yeah, that's definitely an easy change to make.
And
as long as we know how to provide what we're offering.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And some of those things change as well. So we probably need to think about a mechanism where as people's circumstances alter, that we can add services they may now need that they didn't when they applied, or they may no longer need. And we can recognize that change as well.
Yeah, and that could ultimately probably become part of the orientation itself. So, as you're talking about, the various things in city structure, it's like, also we have the following services available should you need them to help with your continued participation. And here they are: childcare, transportation subsidy, blah, blah, blah.
I think that's a great idea. I've also considered that maybe we would want new members and newly reappointed members to do the orientation. So if it's a 3-year term, then once every 3 years, you spend an hour and a half or something just getting a refresher. And so that might be another way of capturing information as people's circumstances change.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Great. Not seeing any other hands, so I think we're moving on to the next part of the work session, correct? Thank you for that presentation.
Yes. So now I am going to share my screen. All right. You folks see my screen? All right, awesome. So we've already talked about the first item. And again, we're gonna just recap things a little bit, talk about review of last week's recommendations on the 3 non-regulatory standing committees, and also discuss the status of our review on a couple of other non-regulatory standing committees. So just as a quick reminder for folks, we are a little behind, but we're getting there. We are looking at clarifying the purpose and charge of the committees. We have already looked at the quasi-judicial, and we're looking at some of the non-regulatory standing committees. Part of that includes not just the purpose and charge, but also the committee structure in terms of the size and the term lengths, and we're going to talk about that today. And then we also just heard the presentation around the orientation program and some of the aspects that are a part of the administrative aspects here. Keep in mind, again, we're still working through all of these items, and pretty soon we will start to also talk about, which we've touched on a little bit tonight, recruitment strategies. So we've already started talking about compensation incentives a little bit. So you all will see that we're kind of hitting the different pieces along this schematic, but we're doing it bit by bit. So just kind of giving folks a lay of the land there. And so just as a reminder, so we did agree and revise the core charge for standing committees, boards, and commissions. And so there are basically 4 main goals. One is to provide the council with tangible recommendations on key priority areas or fulfill the city's regulatory functions and requirements. The second is to leverage residents' technical expertise or their lived experiences to inform city policies and programs. Again, this is like thinking about what we want these committees to do. Third is ensure that the council has regular and timely information to use when considering its priorities or important issues. And then we also have these committees to create an opportunity to engage residents on issues that are important to them, as well as enable residents to assist in community education and engagement activities in their priority areas. So just as a reminder, we started looking at all of the committees based on these agreed upon factors. And this is something that we talked about as a council. So primarily, does this work support council priorities or a continuing city structural purpose? Do we, or is this an issue that is well addressed by a standing committee? Do we need ongoing attention on the issue, which is why it would exist in the standing capacity? And what is the staff capacity to support the committee? Secondarily, we looked at whether or not there's a need for technical expertise or lived experience of residents to kind of help inform this issue. Is the issue relevant and important to residents? And that's critical when it comes to recruitment. And then we also started to think about, can an existing entity do the work? Do we really need a committee, or is there someone else out there that can do the work that we are charging the committee with doing? All right. So with that, I just want to make sure that I think I'm handing things over now. Perfect.
I think I'm taking over. Is that right? Okay. So we talked last week about these 3, the Grants Review Committee, the Recreation Committee, and the Emergency Preparedness Committee. And these were all committees where we recommended maintaining them more or less with a similar mission and structure, although standardizing our structures across all of them with the 7 to 9 members, except where there are exceptions, having the term limits we've talked about before. And then in the case of the Recreation Committee, we talked about considering a name change revision and strengthening the focus on community engagement and other community needs. we updated the emergency preparedness recommendations or key issues a little bit since the last meeting, just based on some updated information we've gotten from the committee since then. They have sort of a unique structure of membership where there are currently 7 members, and then some very specific institutional members that are currently part of the code, including the fire department, the Montgomery County Office of Emergency Preparedness, and the hospital. And then they also have 5 kind of separate open institutional positions that are sort of as needed, other people could be appointed. So we've been talking with them a little bit and would like to amend that structure a little bit just to update it. And so we'll be kind of getting into the details on that more as we develop specific language for the code and consider it. But right now we're looking at something that would involve likely the 7 residents, which would be in line with how we have had other recommendations for other committees with the 7 to 9, and then maintaining the fire department, which has been a very active member in most cases recently, probably eliminating the hospitals since they are no longer in Tacoma Park, and then probably maintaining that Office of Emergency Management at Montgomery County, along with perhaps a few of those additional kind of unnamed institutional spots as needed. So we'll get into that a little more as we get into sort of the specifics with code changes, but that's what we've been looking at. And this is kind of just a recap of what we talked about last week.
Can I stop? Sorry.
Yeah.
Before we go on, because I'm tired, I might forget it. And I don't know if this is a good idea, but I just want to throw it out there. For emergency preparedness, even with the hospital closing, I wonder if it would make sense to maybe see if the clinic, the CCI clinic on New Hampshire Avenue, would like to have a representative on the emergency preparedness committee or something. I don't know if again, I'm not sure if it is a good idea or not. The committee may know, but I was actually thinking if you have fire, there may be some good reasons to have that connection with emergency preparedness. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there as something we may want to explore.
Thanks.
I think as the council committee looks at this, I think the original purposes for these different institutions to be on there might have been for a different reason. So not sure that that's continued to be valid as you think about the committee, but again, it's kind of what's the purpose of those different members, and should it be a medical entity for a particular reason, or is it more a physical entity for a different reason? So that would be part of what you might want to pursue a little bit more.
Yeah, I will say in another life, usually you would include your hospital and your fire department as part of emergency preparedness in case of mass casualty event, and where people would likely go and where med surge would be. So I agree. It might be helpful to have conversations with the committee about getting our hospitals moving, whether or not we just need medical expertise, or is it that we need to know what is the closest facility to the city in case we have a mass casualty event, and making sure that they're at the table.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the point here is that we can refer this back to the committee, but as I think Councilmember Kosick was starting to say, the idea is that the committee and the staff member that works with them are perfectly able to take a look at the old language and see what makes more sense now. And they've been asked to do that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've also talked with them about is there may be members who, or there may be institutions or institutional organizations that might not necessarily make sense as a full member, but might be someone they want to bring in regularly to consult with or have attend a number of meetings or, work with in the short term as well. All right, any other questions on what we talked about last week or thoughts? Okay, let's move on to this week then. So we have
Excuse
three.
me, I was trying to raise my hand.
Oh, yeah.
I just have too many buttons and didn't push any. One point on the emergency preparedness, I wonder if that even needs to be a council-appointed committee. It really works at the pleasure of the police chief, and I don't know that there is any real role because the chief himself could be making recommendations for policy changes if he feels they're important. And so he could have that, he could be the conduit through which those policy changes would be recommended for consideration by the committee. And since it's kind of a hybrid, it might be easier for us and easier for them were that not considered a council-appointed committee. And really, I will say that, we've, the council has had little participation in appointing people to that committee. It usually is the police chief himself, more so in the past than now, but the chief that is more in control of that committee. That may be the wrong word, but more active in that committee than what we see staff members in the other committees. So my recommendation is that we consider changing that from a council committee to just let the police department do as they wish for forming a committee, and council members can recommend people along the way, but let the chief decide who's on the committee.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. I think this is an interesting point that has come up in our discussions in our small group with Councilmember DeBala and Circe about not just this committee, but actually some other ones as well, and wondering what the appropriate role is for council in appointing people versus staff identifying people and appointing people. And there certainly are some pros and cons, I think, to the two approaches. I think the idea with having them be connected through the council has been that there's potentially more connection to council and potentially more of a commitment to council to doing some outreach and recruiting, as well as maybe helping identify more of the direction of the work that they're doing. But there are committees like this, that work on very specific tasks with staff members. And this is one that really doesn't connect so much with the council on a regular basis.
Right. I think that, what we should be looking at is what is the role and purpose of the committee. And in this case, it is to really assist the police department rather than in something like the Recreation Committee, where the role is to make recommendations for policy changes to the council.
Thanks. I think this is something we can maybe bring back for some more in-depth discussion. I think it's a really useful thing to look at as we move forward. Anything else on those other three that we just talked about? Okay, so three new committees for tonight. Arts and Humanities, which has the role of advising how to serve the public on arts, encouraging participation and coordination, and facilitating opportunities for art and programs. We are recommending to retain the committee and make some updates to the code to standardize and also to clarify some of their specific roles. There are some aspects of the duties that are listed in the code that it does not seem the committee really performs on a regular basis in the way that they're written in the code, and probably aren't as relevant as maybe they were when they were first devised. So we could probably update those. There is a question here, maybe it's on the next slide related to membership, so we'll discuss that in a minute. Here it is, thanks. Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, Councilmember Searcy. Thanks. Just staying on arts and humanities for a minute here. So the current structure is to have 11 to 15 committee members, which includes up to a third that can be non-residents of Tacoma Park. We're recommending applying the common member structure, which would be reducing that to 7 to 9, which committee members have said they think is a much more manageable amount. They currently have, I think, 7 or 8 who are on the committee right now, and they found that to be a good number. Their recommendation from the committee and from city staff has been to maintain the non-resident membership option for up to a third of the committee because of the nature of the interconnectedness of the arts across the region. Many of the works of art and performances in Tacoma Park being from artists and performers who may not actually be residents, but may be very connected with the city or the arts community here. And so that has been their recommendation. That's something we may want to consider more if that's something that council is comfortable with or not. That's the recommendation that they have brought forward. If we could go back, Councilmember Searcy, just to the last slide, I'll just zoom through the other two and then open it up. So Youth Council, I think we all know, is promotes active participation in the city government system and helps address youth issues and plan youth programs. The Youth Council has been very successful as a committee, and we are not recommending any significant changes needed to the structure or the membership, which is a little different than some of the other committees, but I think we've given a lot of thought to it in recent years and don't require additional changes at this time. And then the Facade Advisory Board has the role of advising on commercial facade designs in the historic districts. We talked about the Facade Advisory Board earlier when we were going through the quasi-judicial committees and recommended removing their official role in the historic review process, which is something that the committee had themselves suggested to us through a recommendation that they created. And so we're considering it now within the broad concept of committees that don't have an official regulatory role. And through our discussions and dig into this, we are recommending that we do not retain the committee because we are unsure that they would really be utilized as a voluntary option for businesses going through the process. But we would love to ask current members for recommendations moving forward, specific to things they think might help with historic review and facade and other aspects of things they've been working on. So any comments or questions on these things before we go through the rest of our slides?
Councilmember Kovar has his hand up, and Councilman Dybala.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if the hand raising was visible at the moment. Thank you for all the work and the recommendations. A few thoughts. On the arts and humanities, I'm not sure I feel intensely about this, but I'm not convinced that it would be impossible for them to do their work but still have us require that the people be residents of the city. It wouldn't mean that if they're residents of the city, they wouldn't still be connected to and have liaison with people in the broader arts community. But that I would be curious in hearing more about how significant or how vital or important it is to have that exception in that case. With regard to the Facade Advisory Board, I think I mentioned to a couple of my colleagues on the working group, I have had some other conversations with people who are involved in this. And, you know, the board originally was set up around the time when the historic district was first established. And at that point, there wasn't the robust process that exists today with the Historic Preservation Commission. And not that the two are identical, but in talking to a lot of people, both people who work on preservation issues and people in the business community and people on the Historic Preservation Commission, I'm comfortable with the idea of not having them continue to be kind of a formal stop on the process of entities that are working their way toward facade changes of some type that could have a historic preservation angle and enabling the Historic Preservation Commission to handle that. And there's nothing to prevent both, not that they're unalterably opposed to each other, but there's nothing to prevent preservationists and business interests from presenting to the Historic Preservation Commission. And, you know, maybe some more minor suggestions are resolved at the FAB level instead of at the HPC level. But since there's a letter from the board itself asking that they not be part of that formal process anymore, and based on my discussions, I think that's okay. I think the one thing we want to do is just make sure that people in the community, both those active in preservation and those who might be involved in business interests, understand the relevance and the importance and the need to potentially appear before the Historic Preservation Commission. I would just add, I don't see people going to a revised board if it's a voluntary process. I think there's enough that's involved in businesses, for example, getting permitting and going through the permitting process, everything that's involved at the county level, that if we say, oh, by the way, there's this voluntary one over here, you can do them too. I just don't think they will. And so to me, if we decide they're no longer going to be part of that, a formal stop in that process, so to speak, which I'm comfortable with, then if that's the answer, then I think we would just eliminate them. And I don't see the need to retain them as a voluntary stop in that process.
Councilman Deval. Councilman Deval, sorry. I think I might have been on mute. You're on mute. I think we're all really tired.
So as Council Member Costick said, well, you know, yesterday was a bit long. As Councilmember Costick said, so the recommendation for these three is to essentially to maintain two of them and to not keep the third. So I just want to say on arts and humanities, the non-resident member is a concern of mine also. And we talked in the committee because there are so few, we talked in our subgroup, because there are so few committees where there's even an option to have non-residents, that we talk about, we consider talking about priorities for residents. And so if there's a strong case to be made for a particular non-resident who has an art business in the city or has connection, has work in the city that is directly relevant, then great, but trying to give priority to residents. So that's one way to look at it rather than just say, only residents.
Well, I think if somebody is
and
involved
it's
in
related. It's related in my mind to the part of their charge that has to do with creating opportunities for artists to work in the city, and that in itself is a specific level of charge that's in the code that maybe I'm not convinced about either, but I wanted to put out the notion of prioritizing residents, but allowing for the option where it actually is necessary. I mean, I see one other hand up.
Can I just say to follow up on that? I think if it's somebody who owns a business, an arts business in the city, but may live outside of it, I think that's a legitimate exception.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I have long advocated for requiring members of the committee to be residents of Tacoma Park. But I do agree that there are extenuating circumstances such as a business owner in the city. And I can see where that would be very appropriate for them to be on the committee, just as I would business owners being on COLTA for the same reason, that they are interested in the business and they are relevant to the business. So, so again, I would go with Councilmember Dabala that we maybe define what the extenuating circumstances are, but that other than that, we limit it to residents only.
Thank you. So the next step on all of these is for the subgroup to work with the city attorney's office to come up with specific code. And so the rubber hits the road when we see the actual words. But these are all great ways to frame the question. Did you want to keep going there, Councilmember Costick?
I just have one more comment, and then I think I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Searcy. I just wanted to say, because I failed to say it earlier, that although we are in this case recommending removing the Facade Advisory Board as a committee, of course, we are very appreciative of the work that the committee members have done, and that goes for all of the committees. We know you all have put in a lot of time and energy, and we really value that, and our decisions on different committees really have nothing to do with the work of residents on them. It's really about the overall structure. So I think, Councilmember Searcy, we can move on to the next week and beyond.
If I can jump in with a late hand, I also, on the Facade Advisory Board, I would also point out that things have changed a lot in the city since that committee was formed. And they've changed in a very positive way because of the work of that committee. You know, we have new procedures, and we have more standards than we had before. And we've seen a lot of changes on storefronts because of the work that they've done. So it's like I think it's appropriate to consider sunsetting that committee just because they've basically done the job.
So hearing.
Oh no, go ahead, Councilmember Dabala.
So hearing only those few.
Sorry, I turned it over to the wrong person. It was you, Councilmember Dabala, not Councilmember Searcy. My mistake.
It doesn't really matter. I'm just glad that we're able to do this together. So on the two sets of committees that we've talked about last week and this week, we've heard only minor revisions to our recommendations. So again, the next step is to do the things that are listed, consulting with the committees and going to the city attorney to turn this into code so we can more formally adopt these things. And then just so you know what's coming up next. So not to leave the best for last, but speaking of change, so the last four are all challenging in their own way. So the Commemoration Commission was established to develop and administer a program for commemorations, memorials, recognitions. They've established the program, and they are meeting tonight to talk about their recommendations back to the City Council for what next. So we want to talk about them next week after we hear back from them. They have a fairly complex membership structure, as you can see in this slide, and in practice, they have 4 members. And they have spent some time recruiting, trying to recruit for their committee, and they have some thoughts on how that's been working. The Nuclear Free Committee has been around for a long time, a much longer time. They also have 4 people in practice who have been the committee for many years, and we're talking with them this week about their views on their charge and what comes next. The Complete Safe Streets Committee, the council has heard from fairly recently, and they have put themselves, as you may recall, they have put themselves on a self-imposed hold. They are also at the moment a little down on membership, and they have completed some specific assignments, and they are looking to what is the next set of assignments for them. So again, stay tuned. Next week, we'll be talking in more detail about that. And last but not least, the Committee on the Environment, which is currently disbanded. There have been several iterations of it and of the Safe Streets Committee over the years, as Councilmember Siemens can surely tell you better than me. And again, we need to be thinking about the four purposes that we set out for ourselves. What do we want out of a committee? What can the committee, what does a standing committee, what they can do that no one else can? And looking at those those factors to see whether these subjects need attention from a standing committee, what the purposes ought to be, what the membership ought to be, and so forth. So you can be starting to think about that for next week. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so the discussion about training and orientation and the discussion about these standing committees has raised some general considerations for us to think about. So we want to leave you with these thoughts, that several committees are required to have, several committees have their own bylaws, and several committees are required in their code to have bylaws, but not every committee does. And so you heard during the orientation and training how that might get handled. The code also specifically mentions commenting on the budget as a duty of some but not all committees. And when we all talked about the purposes of a standing committee, that was not one that we specifically identified. Doesn't mean a committee can't do it, but this question of generally charging everyone with commenting on the budget every year, why just a couple of groups and not everybody? And I think that's something that we want to address as a consistency across the groups. And a few committees, we talked about this already, a few committees allow non-residential members, and we've come up with a couple of ways to address that. So these are some general considerations that keep coming up over and over. And I think the last slide is the things we talked about last week, what the role of the council needs to be if we want to get the tangible recommendations. We want to leverage the resident experience. We want the timely information so we can do our jobs. We want the help with the community engagement, the eyes on the street. Then what do we as a council need to build into our work in order to help committees to do their jobs? And so clearly we are making appointments to committees, and Councilmember Siemens raised that question. Do all of these committees need to be appointed by the council? Do they all serve the council in this way of providing tangible recommendations, et cetera, that the council needs to do its work? So we make appointments. That's the easy part in a way. We need to build in regular interaction and feedback on the committee's work. Several of the committees in their code are required to do an annual report, and then others are not. So we don't necessarily see them, and there's not that interchange. So that's a question in terms of how you want the code to be. And last but not least, we'll be talking next week about how we can assist with recruiting and outreach. Committees can't do it on their own, And the council, by the same breath, can't do it all on its own either. So as we approach this, the first of these semi-annual appointment processes, how do we want to handle it, and what can we try that's new? What do we need to wait 6 months before we can bring it online? And with that, I'll stop talking and take comments on this last set of thoughts, either on general considerations or on the role of the council, or not. Maybe we're done for tonight.
Thanks. I don't know. Are there
Okay.
Sorry, are there specific questions you had on the last slide? I think, or are they things we're going to discuss moving forward? Sorry,
There were
I'm
not.
really tired.
Yeah, there are not specific questions yet. There will be when the code language shows up, because that stuff will either be consistently in there or it'll consistently not be in there.
Okay.
And I think, not to put words in the mouth of the other committee members, but I think we're all looking more toward lean and mean rather than loading a lot of stuff up.
Yeah. I think.
But it looks like Councilman Susie.
Yeah, I know it's late for folks, and but one of the I think is really, really important for us to think about and be prepared to solidify is what type, and this is something that's not going to be in the code. It might be, may not be, but what support do we as the council want to provide, or how do we want to provide that support to the committees that we establish? And we've heard time and time again that they don't get that face time with us. Some not really apparent that we're interested in what they're bringing forward. So how do we want to engage? And is that something that we work into the code? We had talked about having identify a council member to work with the specific committees. That's something that's really important for us to all walk away as a bit of homework for the next meeting. In terms of how we want to do that, because I will say, like with the Arts and Humanities Committee Commission, as Councilmember Costick brought up, when we looked at the duties, there was a lot of language there around making budgetary recommendations and drafting reports. And there's a lot of language that's currently in code around what some of these committees are responsible for doing that may go outside of the purpose that we've already discussed. And so if that's not something we want people to do, if instead we want them to submit those annual reports and we want to, for them to come to council 3 times a year or something, I'm making it up. That's some of the things that we need to have in the back of our minds of how we want to engage with committees in case we need to write some of that into the code.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Well, I think I'll say what I said last week, which I actually think we should be assigned committees as council members to do that. I think it's important to, just like we do with COG or NLC or other things, and then we bring that back to council members. I do think it's really important to have that connection between what the committee is doing and council. So I recommend that for the committees. And I think we'll end up with fewer committees than we started with, which I do think is actually a good thing, that hopefully it won't be too hard to assign us one, and maybe some people get 2, but we could rotate it. But I'd really like to do that. Councilmember Siemens?
I will just say I don't want to extend the conversation this evening, but I can say that I have reservations with your perspective, and
okay,
look forward to talking with you about that.
Great, happy to do that. Just looking for some mechanism, because I have seen committees get ahead of the council and it having repercussions for each of us, and then the city. So I'd like to put in place some mechanism in which committees don't get ahead, or commissions don't get ahead of the council. Councilwoman Costick?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one of the other things that I think was kind of driven home for me as I've talked with some of the committees is the sort of feedback loop, both from council and from committees. You know, that there's sort of a gap oftentimes also in the process of what is supposed to happen next when they do make a recommendation. And I know as a council member, I have at times felt, you know, a little uncertain of what the next step was when we got a recommendation, perhaps from a committee. You know, and I think we've sometimes had miscommunications about, you know, were some city staff members working on something or not, or were council working on something or not. And I think for committees too, that has also sometimes felt like then the council wasn't being responsive if they didn't see sort of immediate action on something. So I also just understanding that it's important for us to find a mechanism to communicate back and forth what's happening in response to their recommendations also. And I think just have an open dialogue.
I think sometimes having staff involved in the committees can also help with that. Councilmember Siemens, do you still have your hand up? Do you want to say anything else? No.
I do, but I'll hold my tongue. Thank you.
All right, are we done? Anything else? I don't see any other hands. All right, we're done. I'm calling it. We're done. All right, we're done for the night. Again, council will be interviewing the finalists for the city manager position early next week, and we'll see you next Wednesday night. Thank you, everyone.